you so much for having us here. And
Good afternoon.
Such a beautiful nation of Hungary. This is my first time. So I want to say thank you for all your hospitality, and I can't wait to enjoy it even more over the weekend. But I'm excited more to be here with Dr. Shea Bradley-Farrell, who has done such amazing and incredible work in the fight for freedom and in the fight for all of our nations. Thank you so much, Doctor.
Thank you.
Yeah, please.
This is my 4th trip to Hungary, and I absolutely love it here. So thank you.
So I want to start out this discussion by talking a little bit about your work right now, and I think this is so vital and so important in the times that we're living in. You're writing a book now for the Center for Fundamental Rights about national identity. Why is that important?
National identity, contrary to what the media is telling you, is actually at the core of nations. It's our shared values, our shared beliefs, our history, and we use all of those things to form our systems that we have, our political systems, our legal systems, and the economies. And I think that Hungary actually is a huge example of how to hold on to your national identity in a world that is increasingly globalized in a bad sense, with leaders around the world that want to take away your independence and your sovereignty. The really unique thing about Hungary and other Warsaw Pact countries is that you guys were occupied by the Soviet Union for 46 years, and the memory of that is still very fresh. Because it was 1991. That was in my lifetime, for sure. So that memory is very, very fresh. But what I have really learned that made impact on my heart is that it's not just that the communists were imprisoning, killing, and torturing people, which they were. Go to the House of Terror if you want to see what loss of freedom looks like. But one of the most detrimental things is they took history. They took culture. They wanted to erase the culture of countries. I'm not telling you guys anything, but that made such an impact on me because I think we see that happening here. In the U.S.
Yeah, in the United States especially, and I was going to go there because I do think that's important, and I think both of our nations, and I think people across the globe, and we've seen that covering CPAC internationally, the struggle that so many conservative leaders and people that do believe in national identity are faced with. And let's talk about that, because the progressive left tends to push this idea that if you are nation first, or that if you have national identity, that you're going to develop into some kind of authoritarian society, and they use that as a form of fear, and I call it fear-mongering, to push that idealism away, to take away and to strip a nation of its actual spirit. How do you confront that? Like, how do you confront that progressive left ideology and get, I would assume, especially our younger people, to believe that that's not the case? It's exactly the opposite.
Yeah, you're right, Sarah. They are completely on different sides of the spectrum, authoritarianism and nationalism or national identity. They can be, of course, turned to evil and exploited by bad actors and bad political movements. And we have seen that happen, of course, throughout history. But really, it's our shared values, and we need these things. But if you think about it this way, it's a strategy of the left, the liberal left, that mocks the strategy of the communists from the Soviet era. They suppressed nationalism. They suppressed national identity, suppressed nationalistic uprisings. I mean, sometimes they used nationalist uprisings for their own benefit, but they suppressed them as well. Dr. Maria Schmidt, who I believe is on there she is, she wrote a wonderful book called From Country to Nation, and it's in English, and it talks about this. It's very, very eye-opening.
I think one of the issues that I found most fascinating, and I just love being here in Budapest and in Hungary, to be here to see it with my own eyes and to meet all the wonderful people here. of this beautiful nation, but is this idea that Prime Minister Viktor Orban, especially that we see in the American media, they smear him. And yeah, you're probably very well aware of this. And the State Department has been very open in how it has treated the Prime Minister and his view of Hungary as nation first, mainly, I believe, and we've discussed this, Doctor, just before coming on, with the issue of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. How do we deal with that in the concept of, like, I think most nations has always seen America as a world leader, as kind of the beacon of light, of a national light and liberty and freedom. But now we're kind of seeing the exact opposite being pushed out of this administration, which was quite different than the Trump administration and President Trump's feelings toward Prime Minister Orban and Hungary.
Sarah, you're exactly right. That is not foreign diplomacy. That is certainly not how you treat a NATO ally who sent troops to Afghanistan to help Americans fight there. We have an ambassador here right now, David Pressman, who is very openly antagonistic towards the United States. But here it is. If you walk back why the Biden administration and David Pressman is antagonistic, read the articles, do the research, spend some time, you will find out that it's 3 or 4 reasons. It is, first of all, and I'll get to the Ukraine issue, it is because Hungary will not take LGBT curriculum into their schools. They believe that sexual education is the right of parents. Go figure. The corporate global tax also made the EU and Biden administration very angry. Hungary's corporate tax was at 9%. They want to impose 15%. The other issue is mass illegal immigration. The EU wants that. Hungary does not. Tried to deal with it in 2015, said, hey, we can't do this. But the Ukraine issue, here's what I say about this. I believe in Ukrainian sovereignty. I don't believe it's in Americans' interest, but we'll set that aside for a second. I hear all the time, yeah, but Orban is pro-Russian because he doesn't want the sanctions applied against Russia on energy coming into Hungary. I say not pro-Russian, Hungarian pragmatic. He puts Hungary first, its nation first, because a lot of Americans don't get this. I'm telling you stuff you guys already know. But before the war, Hungary was dependent on Russian energy, like 85% natural gas, 60% oil. Soviet-era infrastructure is still what they use. And to cut it off the way the EU wanted in the time that they wanted, that's another conversation, would have crushed the Hungarian economy. So I try to explain this. He simply was putting his nation first, like I wish our current president would do.
That's a really great point. And I want to go back, though, really quick to the LGBTQ push, the progressive push, both in America as well as globally. We discussed that and other issues that I believe focus mainly on socialism. And I was telling Dr. Shea that my mother was from Cuba. She left in the late 1960s, so she was very familiar with communism in Cuba and what that did to her own nation. And one of the main issues that stayed with her was the fact that she noticed the indoctrinations first in the school system. So it started progressively slow, but it targeted children. And the belief was that when children become more dependent on the state and less dependent on their parents, then it becomes easier for the state to take control. Can we talk a little bit about that and what we're seeing currently, both in the United States and in Europe, this move towards this progressivism that I think many of us have seen separates families more than unifies families and also separates nations more.
Yeah, which again, I hate to keep saying this, was a strategy that the communists used, separating children from families, separating people from religion so that they could be the final authority, the one ideology, the one truth, the one political party. And I used to think this kind of talk in America, where we put our heads in the sand sometimes was like conspiracy talk, but it's not. It's really happening, and we have to be aware of it and stop it. But
how do we do that? How do the members of the audience do that? How do Americans do that? How do we do it by standing up and talking? Do we unify?
Yeah, simply by being aware, by learning, by doing what we're doing today, by not being afraid, because I know that there are people that are not going to like what I'm saying, and I've definitely put up with that a lot, but I don't care, because I don't want to lose Western civilization. I don't want to lose my freedom, and that's the problem. And what I was going to say too, Sarah, that relates to what you just mentioned and what your mom said, which is very cool. During the Obama administration, I uncovered, really, with an organization that I was working for at the time, CWA, what the Obama administration was doing in regards to ideology, sending ideology over to the United States, because the conservatives in the U.S. didn't really know this. A lot of congressmen and women had no idea. We were spending billions on, let's talk about the LGBT ideology curriculum in children's schools. I have the curriculum that I could show you, where on a scale of 1 to 10, a child in being gay and being LGBT in Asia was one of the programs, what it was called, where you on the scale could decide how much you felt like a man that day, how much you felt like a woman. Did you feel like you loved men, or did you feel like this was our curriculum? We were pushing that.
Were we doing it too for financial gain? Because I mean, for another country. So, for example, not for us, but for the other nation to get a loan, to be granted financial aid from the U.S. State Department and such, was it easier for countries to actually access U.S. funding?
Yeah, of
if
course.
they accepted it?
Yes.
So that's
I had country leaders coming to me and saying, can you help us? Because we feel pressured that we must accept this curriculum into our schools and into our whatever, in order to get aid. You're exactly right.
That's really fascinating. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I want to conclude with this, and maybe, I don't know if it applies as well to Hungary. Obviously, your memory is much fresher than any Americans right now, especially dealing with communist regimes. But do you believe that the American people, in a sense, have forgotten what could happen when liberty is taken from them? I mean, like, they don't really have a complete understanding, the way maybe the Hungarian audience does, in understanding what life would be like without liberty. And what does liberty actually really mean in this new day and age? I mean, we think about it historically, the tyranny, the beginning of America, the revolution,
Yeah.
We think about it ourselves, the struggle of the Hungarian people to liberate themselves and to be their own nation, separate of that of the former USSR or the control. What does that mean, though?
I think you're right. Americans, it's been a very long time that we weren't free, over 200 years, right? Like I said, if you go to the House of Terror, you visually can see what the loss of freedom looks like. So that's why I think it's very important to educate our children. Our school system is something that needs to be restructured and revamped. Because what the leftists are doing right now, the communist behaviors, is they've taken our narrative. You just asked about freedom. They take the word human rights, and if you don't want your children to learn sexual education in the schools, and you don't want them to learn about LGBT stuff, it's up to you, you're called a human rights abuser. So that word, human rights, has been conflated with all kinds of things now. It used to just be a foundational, religious freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of conscience. It's really been twisted because, quite honestly, during the Trump administration, I tried to help also worked for the human rights of LGBT, whatever, MNOP, people in other countries who were being imprisoned for being gay or beheaded or something. That's a human rights violation. It's not a human right to say you have to teach this in a school. So we have to change the narrative and take back our language and explain what things really mean.
I got 7 seconds for you. How do we do that? How do we work with our partners here in Hungary? How do we work with our partners throughout the globe? This is CPAC International. This is a way of connecting with other conservative leaders around the world. How do we utilize this so that Hungary puts their nation first, America puts our nation first, but we do this in a way that we can benefit from one another and learn and maybe change the trajectory of where we are headed right now?
Sarah, I think we're doing it. I was here last year, and it was maybe half the number of people. The speakers are even a greater leadership level that have come now. I've learned, from a friend from Poland today, what's going on in Poland with their national sovereignty issues. I actually think we're doing it. So let's not be afraid. Let's keep doing it. And my husband and I understand what it's like to get backhanded. So I'm not saying it's easy, but our freedom depends on it.
Let's speak up. Thank you so much.